Buenas noches. Tonight we're going to give an introduction to the Flower of Life and to present it in a slightly different way than it is presented in the books. Also to talk about the relationship the Flower of Life has to sacred geometry and to a few other related subjects like crop circles and ETs and a lot of other things associated with it. These two guys on the screen, by the way, are some of the original ETs. They're not from here, really, they're not. They're from the star Sirius. And before that, they were from another galaxy further back over that. And then one day when they came to Sirius, they found out that Sirius and our sun were linked and moved together, and they came here. But they're not really from here. Okay, probably most of you have guessed by now, this is the Flower of Life. Flower of Life, it's interesting how I found out about it. It took me 12 years of research, of doing research with sacred geometry. And ultimately, anyone who works in sacred geometry long enough comes back to the realization that this holds all sacred geometry, period and end, everything there is. Now, what is sacred geometry? Well, everything in the reality, everything, the stars, the planets, the sun, your body, everything in this world that we know of, just everything that exists, everything that's manifested through the sacred geometrical proportions. And there is no exceptions, absolutely zero. Everything you can think of, any words you can say, in fact, the very words themselves came out of sacred geometry. Even language comes out of sacred geometry. It's all of that. Even things that you would never guess, like emotions and feelings. It was Manfred Klein and Dan Winter in the United States who figured out that emotions were related to sacred geometry. They put people on EKG machines and put them up and found that there was a sine wave signature that a person was emitting when they were feeling a certain feeling. And every feeling has a unique sine wave signature. And those sine wave signatures are then converted into three-dimensional forms that you can hold in your hands. And all of those forms are based on sacred geometry. So there's a thing, a three-dimensional polyhedron you can hold in your hand that represents love, and another one that represents the opposite, say hate. And so this is clear with the entire world that's studying this right now, and I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people now studying it. But there was a time, even though this is new to the world right now, it's new because it hasn't been remembered in a long time. There were only a few people. Rudolf Steiner started to remember this, and people like Buckminster Fuller started to understand it, though he only understood it to a certain level. He didn't really fully get it. And then people like Robert Lawler really got it, and Keith Kirchlow definitely got it. And these people started talking about it, but most of the world didn't have any idea what they were talking about. But long ago, 6,000 years ago, all the way up until roughly right after the Greek Empire in ancient Greece, this was known everywhere, all over the world. The Flower of Life was like Elvis Presley. I mean, everybody knew it. And I'm just going to show you a few places just so you can understand that this truly was everywhere, all over the world. There's different things in here. This is called the Flower of Life. There are 19 circles, if you counted them, in here. And they're surrounded by two circles. Those outer two circles are not just for looks. They're extremely important in all of this. And inside the middle of here, there's this middle one where you see these 6 petals. And then outside of that, there are 6 more that move around that, if you could see that. It's hard to see, but you'll see it in a minute. That's called the seed of life. And these are not words I'm making up. These are the actual words that were used in ancient times to describe this. I think they called it the flower of life because it looks like a flower and because it is the laws and proportions for everything alive and even not alive. Everything that's manifested. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show you places around the world where this was found in ancient times. The Essenes, 500 BC. This was their first city that they built after they came out of Egypt. And in the very center of this complex, these are ancient ruins here. This is at Masada. They had a church. And in the center of that church, it was their most important building. And though it's really hard to see in the slide, and if you pull it up close and look at it, you can see it. But right here, this is the floor. And it's not even focused. You got to do, okay, trust me. This was a big square at one time, and squares that came in right here, which you could see the outer ends of it that was still left on the floor, was the flower of life. It's very clear if you're there. I've had people that were there and took really good photographs of it. And so the flower of life was actually a central motif in the Essene community. This comes right out of the center, like I was showing you before. And you'll see both of these, both the center one and that complex right there in ancient times. This is a mosaic floor out of Greece. It's on the island of Crete. And right there, you can see the central motif out of the flower of life. However, the flower of life is found all over Greece. I don't have all the slides here to show it. In fact, they found something that I just got recently, which is really incredible. It's a monastery in Greece. It's very old. It has a big white wall all the way around it, and it's all white buildings, white inside, white outside. And on the outside of this wall, about every 100 feet, is the flower of life, all the way around it. And in every single building, in every single room inside, and even windows in stained glass, is the flower of life. It's interesting. The monk who ran that was named Melchizedek. This is off of a very, very old chest that came out of Turkey. And here you can see the flower of life motif with the 6 circles moving around it. We found it in 18 places around the Mediterranean, in countries practically all the way around it. So it was really well known there. This is called the seed of life, which is out of the middle of the flower of life. And this one here is an interesting one. This is a business that we started a long time ago, making organic seeds from 1988. But this pattern in the back is the seed of life. And it was taken from a wooden box that came from Tibet. And the box contained an instrument for planting seeds. But it came from Tibet. This comes out of Ireland. And it's a doorknob. The doorknob went right through there. And this is more complex with all this Gaelic designs and things. But there's a star here and a star coming back. And there's the 13 patterns. And if you've studied the flower of life, you'll know that this is all connected to the flower of life. We found it in England and France. And we found it in Israel, in several places. We found it in Egypt. In fact, the first place we ever found it was in Egypt. It was found on a 6,000-year-old wall in Egypt, though I believe that even though the wall was 6,000 years old, that the flower of life was not done 6,000 years before, but was done by the Coptics in 500 BC, about the same time as the Essenes. The Coptics and the Essenes were working together. And here's another man we're all familiar with, Leonardo da Vinci, out of the Italian Renaissance. He definitely knew about the flower of life, though the people who have studied Leonardo da Vinci and have spent their lifetime trying to understand his work do not understand this. In fact, it was found in a book of things that they threw away because they didn't know what it was. But this is Leonardo's drawing, showing where he's got the flower of life pattern expanded inside of here. And Leonardo spent a great deal of time looking at all the little angles that were inside the flower of life, making each possible way and relationship that he could find out of this. And he made pages of these, studying the flower of life in great detail. But of course, he was a Mason. And the Masons were intimately connected with the flower of life. And that proof is beautiful, though I can't show it to you here. The Masons, whenever they built a temple, in fact, all the churches that were built in Europe in the earlier days, when they removed the cornerstone out of it, on the back were the signatures of all the Masons and the architects who built that. They were very strange-looking things. They were like a circle with a line going across, or a line like this, and then a line coming over like they were. You just look at them and you go, what's that? But we've looked at several hundred of them, every one that we could find, the names of all these Masons, and every single one of them mapped perfectly over the flower of life. So obviously, they also knew about it, and so do all the zodiacal signs that are in astrology, mapped perfectly over the flower of life, and so do the runes. You know, the ruins, the ones that you throw to get the thing, where they came from. Anybody know? Is Sweden or Norway or somewhere up in there? All the ruins map perfectly over the flower of life. So they were using that as their key also. And so I could go on for a long time, actually. I'll go a few more. We mentioned Tibet, but a place where this symbol was extremely popular, and is even till today, was China. It's all over China, even today. No matter where you go in there, you'll find it constantly. You'll find it on their screens. You'll find it these folding screens. And one of the most prominent places is in the Forbidden Palace. And in the Forbidden Palace, in the emperor's throne, there are two lions, these snarling lions on either side of his throne. And the lion on the left side of him, if he was facing out, was a female, and it just has a kitten, a lion kitten under her paw. But the lion on the right side, the male, has under his right paw a three-dimensional flower of life. It's a sphere, but it's three-dimensional. And it says right in front of there, because this was what the emperor said, was that this lion was protecting all the knowledge of the universe. And then, if you go into China, you'll find the flower of life everywhere. It's all over the Shinto temples. And again, you'll see the lions protecting not only the flower of life, but the seed of life, and even the central core of life will be displayed. And the first time I ever gave one of these workshops in Japan, I had 3 Shinto priests who knew that I was going to talk about this, sat in my class, and they were very quiet. They didn't say hardly anything. And then every once in a while, I would say something, I would be explaining this stuff like that, and they'd go, they'd visibly be shocked. And finally, they warmed up a little bit, and we got to talk. And they said they had been the Shinto priests. They had been priests all their life, but they didn't know what it meant because they had lost the true meaning that was behind all of this. One of them, when I got to something that's called Metatron's cube, and that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge just about fell out of his chair. Because Metatron's cube, once a year, they put on this beautiful silk white robe, and over the breastplate is this complex pattern called Metatron's cube, which we have up there. None of them had any idea what it was. They didn't even know. All they knew was that from ancient times, they were to wear that thing and walk down the street once a year and do this particular ceremony, but they had no idea what this thing was. And this is what we found everywhere, all over the world. There was a time once when the whole world knew about this, but at this point, almost everybody's forgotten what it is. Even the Freemasons, by the way. I've had very high levels of the Freemasons go through here, and when they study very carefully what's going on, they were not even told about a lot of the things that we're talking about, because more than likely, even their leaders have forgotten. So I don't remember what the next slide is. Aha, I do remember now. This pattern could be infinite. I mean, you could keep right on going and going up across the whole wall. You could keep going forever. But all over the world, they stopped at 19 circles and put these 2 circles around it. Why did they do that? Obviously, it had. Why didn't they go out further, or why did they go only in the middle? Why was it always 19 circles? Well, that became clear as I was studying this and we were decoding what this was. The reason is because, and I can't explain this, you're going to have to read into the books in order to understand this, but spirit, when spirit comes out of the void, out of nothing, and begins to do a vortex rotational motion in a certain way, it creates the flower of life. And there's a vortex pattern that it makes that begins to make this pattern. And if you were to complete the circles that are only partially drawn, like here's one here that's only partially drawn, here's another one that's only partially, here's a little piece of one and here's like 3 pieces of ones that are only partially drawn. You're going to find lots of them in here. They're not completed circles like this one. If you complete all the circles around the outer edge, just do that. And when you do, this yellow is where the 2 lines of the flower of life was. And these blue ones are the completed flower of life pieces that were missing. You do that. And then the innermost points, which we talk about in the book, are here, there, 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 and there. That's where the next rotational vortex is. And so when you do it, you make the next vortex, you get another sphere at each one of those places, and they link through and form this pattern of 13 circles. In other words, they didn't want you to see this pattern of 13 circles because it was too sacred. In the ancient world, that pattern could not be displayed publicly. They would kill you if you did it. I would be killed for showing you this if this was 3,000 years ago, because it was too sacred for just the average person to know. So if you extract it out, you get this, leaving out all the rest of it, and you have these 13 circles. This was called the fruit of life to the ancients. And it has 13 systems of knowledge in there. And the reason it's called the fruit, because it fills in all the details of the reality, of this reality we live in. All the tiny details are all established and created through this one single pattern. Now, there are a lot of other things that happen coming to this pattern that we haven't talked about. And that you can pick up in the books if you read them. But I just want to talk about this one pattern for a little bit. In sacred geometry, a straight line is considered male. There's total consensus in the world on this from all people that I'm aware of that are studying in sacred geometry. But any curved line that's not straight, no matter what the curve is, it's female. I mean, you can just look at male and female bodies and see that the male body is straighter and the female body is curvier. But at any rate, in sacred geometry, this has been established. And this image that you're looking up here is all female. There's no male in here. But there's 13 ways that the male can be superimposed over the female. 13 different, entirely unique ways, and each one produces this vast system of knowledge that just keeps expanding out further and further. I mean, you could spend half your life studying each one of these systems of knowledge and never come to the end because it's so complex and there's so much involved in it. In the Flower of Life books, I only show 4 of the systems because it's just too much to go on to all of it. But by looking at 4 systems, you can definitely understand. Tonight, we're only going to look at 1 because we'd be here the rest of the night just doing this. The simplest, most obvious way to link male lines, straight lines over the female curved lines is simply by connecting all the centers together, the centers of these circles. In other words, to connect this center to that center, you draw a straight line through there. But this center here would be another line. This center would run that way, up that way. This one would run from here over to there. And you just do all possibilities of every possible way that straight lines can move over there, and you get this. And if you could focus it a little bit. And this is called Metatron's cube. This is what was on the Shinto's priest, on the breastplate of the Shinto's priest, where the guy just practically fell out of his chair when I showed him this, because to them it was one of the most sacred images in existence. And so you could just say, well, so what? What is it? It's just a bunch of lines, you know? I mean, it doesn't mean anything, does it? Well, it really does. In just regular geometry, not even sacred geometries, but in regular geometry, there are a lot of polyhedron, three-dimensional shapes that connect back into themselves. And there are 5 of them that are unique. They're completely unique. There are no others like them. And they're called the Platonic solids. It was after Plato in the Grecian times when he was talking about the Platonic solids, though he was not the first. And in fact, they have traced the Platonic solids back in humanity scientifically 20,000 years BC, where they have found people alive somewhere that have carved three-dimensional, the 5 Platonic solids three-dimensionally that have been dated back to 20,000 BC. So it's been around a while, at least. But inside of here are those 5 Platonic solids. You can't see them. It takes time. You got to figure it out. But what you do is you keep certain lines and you erase other lines to get to them. For example, if I was to only keep these lines and erase all the other ones, and these little white lines are the ones that are on the back side of this three-dimensional form, and the heavy ones are on the front side of it, you get something called the icosahedron, which is this. And that, of course, goes back around. It's 20 triangles linked. What makes these this one, the icosahedron, and the other 4 unique is that they have these characteristics. All the edges of this shape are all the same, all over. They're all the same length. All of the faces are the same. They're equilateral triangles. All of the angles inside are exactly the same. And this shape will fit inside of a perfect sphere where all the extending points out of here will lie on the surface of the sphere. Believe me, they have taken computers and had these computers run day and night for months and months and months trying to find a 6th Platonic solid. No one's ever found one. These are all 5 of them There's a tetrahedron, a cube, octahedron, the icosahedron we just looked at, the pentagonal dodecahedron, and the sphere, of course, which is not one of the Platonic solids, but it's where they came from. The sphere is what contains them, because all the points of these things are sitting on the surface of this sphere invisibly. So the female, which is pure female, gave birth to these 5 different male forms. They're male because they have nothing but straight lines in them. Understand? So what are the Platonic solids? Well, any engineer that goes to college has to learn about these, because they are the forms that determine structure. Like if you're building a bridge or anything else like that, you have to know stress and everything else like that, and they're all based back under these 5 shapes. Structure is the primary key of them. For example, all crystals known to man, which there are a little slightly more than 100,000 of them, like quartz or emerald or different kinds of crystals, all have the atoms inside of them arranged in different geometrical patterns that are all functions of these 5 Platonic solids, period, in the end. No matter what the crystal is, it came from one of those 5 shapes. And viruses, all viruses are polyhedron. They're just shapes like this. That's all they are. And all viruses in existence came from one of these 5 shapes, which, by the way, is the secret on how you can cure all viruses. We've already done it. They just won't let us talk about it. Somebody will do it. Once you figure that out, it's not too far behind. You can eliminate any virus by knowing how this works. Everything in our reality, in fact, if you want to just jump to the very end period of the whole, bottom line of the whole thing, the periodic table of elements, all the elements of everything from hydrogen to helium to etc., all the way through, and silver, gold, all the way that the electrons are arranged around the atoms and the way that they are configured inside of there are all a function of one form, which is the cube. That's been established scientifically. They didn't understand it when they did it. All they knew was that that one form determines everything. And so, in other words, the very fabric of all, which is just atomic levels of everything inside of our reality, from every level conceivable on an atomic level, is a function of one of the Platonic solids. You can go deeper and deeper and deeper into this, and the more you study it, the more outrageous it is, the more you begin to realize that everything is a function. But this is just the structural pattern. They're important to understand in many different disciplines, but they're also important to understand if you're trying to figure out why you're here and what this reality is all about. And yet this is only one system out of 13. So there are 12 more extraordinary systems of knowledge, not based on this, that go into other levels of our existence. There's even a system of knowledge that determines consciousness itself. When consciousness, the very levels of where consciousness is harmonic and is able to interpret the one reality that exists. There is only one reality. There just is whatever there is. But there are many, many, many ways, at least 100,000 ways that Melchizedeks have determined that you can interpret that one reality. And all of those are based on sacred geometry. You can actually measure. If you went to a planet that you never saw before and you got some weird looking ET, and you could just lay them out and measure them and figure them all out and find out which one of these forms he came out of, his structural form and things like that. And you can do certain things to determine, and you can find out exactly, without ever even talking to them, how they're interpreting the one reality, how they're seeing it.
and that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge.
The tetrahedron was called fire. The cube was called earth. The octahedron was called air. The icosahedron was water. And the pentagonal dodecahedron was ether or prana, life force energy or chi. And these five, the combination of these five forms created a discipline called alchemy, where the understanding of the blending of fire, earth, air, water, and ether were what created everything and were the basis of creation itself. Another basis of creation itself is the DNA molecule. The DNA molecule is what contains the knowledge of, say, how your body is created. However, I believe that it's a little bit further along than that it actually contains the knowledge of how to create the entire universe. But it has at least that much of how to create your body. But all the physical forms, biological forms on the earth are all based on DNA. And that, the DNA molecule, is based only on these two forms. Now, there is a way. The original way was that they saw it as a cube that was rotating at 72-degree angles. That was one of the first ways. And then later, other scientists discovered that, okay, you could see it that way, but a better way is seeing it with these two forms here. These two forms in sacred geometry are what are called duals of each other. They're duals because if you take the centers of the pentagonal dodecahedron and drew lines between them, you get this form. And the other way around, if you take the centers of this one, you get this form. They're duals of each other. In the same way that these two are duals of each other, if you connect the centers of a cube, you get an octahedron. And this one defines the parameters of this one. So these two are duals of each other, and these are duals of each other. This one here is found also in the cube, and in a way that I'll explain in just a moment. So this is your DNA, and what it is the DNA is just the icosahedron creates the dodeca, and then the dodeca creates the icosa again, which creates the dodeca again, which creates the opposite again, and it begins to turn, and it makes the two strands of the DNA. And a little detail that's interesting that they've discovered just recently in the last couple of years, you know, in all your biological books, you usually see a DNA molecule sort of coming from nowhere and going nowhere. They just sort of start and twist and stops, and like it goes on forever. That's not true. They've thrown that out in the last couple of years, and it's been proven by other universities, though it's not in the textbooks yet, unless you got a brand new textbook. But the DNA molecule wraps back on itself and completes itself, and you can see how it does it, because one end is this and one end is that, and they lock, like a little lock, and they form a circle, and what it really is what's called a torus, or a toroidal field. It's like a donut. It wraps back around. And the torus, or the donut shape, is the most unique shape in existence. It can do things that no other shape in existence can do, and it's the first shape that comes out of the flower of life. I didn't talk about all of that, but it is the most primal shape in existence. And so that's what these two things do, is create that. This is very interesting because this is water, and that's prana. Water and life force energy is the pattern that creates the DNA. You can think about that for a few weeks. Just alone, at least I did. Okay. Now, with that basic understanding, we're going to come back here again to Metatron's cube, you know, where we started, where all those different shapes were. And there's one particular shape in here, which is the tetrahedron. But interesting is that when you get the tetrahedron, you don't get the tetrahedron by itself. You get two of them, and they're interlocked in this way. It's called a star tetrahedron. So if you were to take this line, and keep that one, and keep this one. Keep the ones that go into the middle. Keep this one here that forms another triangle there. Keep another one that comes down, forms another triangle there. There's a series of them. You'll see them in a minute. Erase all the rest of them. You get this. And at first glance, it doesn't look like anything. Definitely doesn't look like anything three-dimensional. But if you were to shade it in a certain kind of way, it becomes clear. And what that is called a star tetrahedron. And it's also inscribed inside of a sphere. This will fit perfectly inside of a sphere. A star tetrahedron inside of a sphere is one of the most primal shapes and important shapes that I could possibly give to you up here. It's more important even than the DNA. And I'm just going to follow down that one road. I mean, and every one of these shapes relative to sacred geometry, you could spend at least a week just going on and on and on about all the different ways that it goes into the reality on every single one of them. And we don't have that kind of time, so I'm only going to go just a little bit here. But now this blue one goes back out the other way, forming a three-dimensional pyramid going out the other way, out the back end. Okay, what is this? What does it mean? Well, one of the ways that the star tetrahedron inscribed in the sphere is important to life, one of them that we're going to talk about right now, is that it is the basis of all biological life forms. All of them, without exception. I don't care if you're on this planet or if you're in anywhere else, and you're some ET and you look really strange and weird, you still are going to go through the same things I'm about to talk about. Because there's only one God, there's only one sacred geometry, there's only one reality, and it's all the same no matter where you go. That's the purpose of why we're doing this, because we are interpreting the one reality from an instrument that is polarized, our brain. It's got a left and a right side, and it sees everything as either good or bad. And once the brain sees absolutely for certain that there is only one function, one thought moving through everything, it does this funny thing to the what's called corpus callosum that links the left and the right side together. It begins to open up, and the two sides begin to balance, and enlightenment begins. Enlightenment means moving out of duality consciousness into unity consciousness, where you begin to see the unity of all life everywhere. You begin to realize that every one of us are linked in ways that the world right now has forgotten. And so, let's look at conception. Conception begins with a round sphere, the first one at the top of that pattern we showed before, the pure female energy of the round sphere called an ovum. We all began as a sphere, each one of us. Probably don't remember, but we did. And then through something called mitosis, we divided from one sphere into two. And this is an electron microscope photograph of the real thing, where we divided from 1 to 2. Then when we go from 2 to 4, using the binary sequence, it goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, which is one of the sequences of life. There's another really important one called the Fibonacci sequence, which we'll just lightly touch on later. It goes from 2 to 4, but when it goes to 4, it isn't just any 4, any old way. It isn't just 4 cells kind of floating around in a fluid. This is an actual photograph. Forget this one because it's beginning to go to the next level. But there's one here, one here, one here, and back here you can see the fourth one, same size. And if you drew a line between there and there and there, and then over to this one in the back, you get a tetrahedron. And it looks like this. The 4 cells are like that, and they're aligned down the north and south axis. There is a north pole and a south pole to the mitosis division of the ovum. And it forms this pattern right here. But then when it goes from 4 to 8, it forms another star tetrahedron facing this way. Like this. There's one linked in coming down here, and one linked